Now, while South Africa's mass vaccine rollout will begin on the 17th of May, we're also tracking the progress in the rest of the region. For more on this, we speak to Xolisani Newzroom, Newzroom Afrika's reporter in Zimbabwe, and Sello Motsetla, the editor of the Tswana Times online publication. Gentlemen, a very good afternoon to both of you, and thank you so much for joining us. Perhaps let's start with you, Xolisani. How is the vaccination process rolling out in Zim?
Good afternoon, Thami, and good afternoon to our viewers. Well, in Zimbabwe, the vaccination drive seems to have taken what I would say an increase. We have more than 400,000 people who have been vaccinated so far, and government is targeting to say they would reach the herd immunity by December. And also, now they're taking to the rural areas. They believe that 70% of Zimbabweans reside in rural areas, so they would want to take the vaccine to those areas.
And progress from the Botswana side, Sello?
According to figures that we were given yesterday, currently in Botswana we are vaccinated about 48,000 people, but government has made full payment or part payment for vaccines covering 1.9 million people. We know Botswana has a small population of 2.1 million, so the idea once the deliveries are done is that the government will cover 1.9 million people, according to the latest figures that we have now.
And Xolisani, which vaccines has Zimbabwe procured?
Well, as of for now, the country is using two vaccines. We are using the Sinopharm vaccine as well as the Sinovac, all from China. These vaccines partly were given as a donation by the Chinese government to Zimbabwe, which is around 400,000 doses that came as a donation. And then the government procured 1.4 million doses, made payment of 4 million doses that are yet to come, all from China. We also got 37,000 vaccines from India, which were also exchanged. We understand, according to government, that they are in talks with Russia to get the Sputnik vaccine, but those discussions are still underway. Although we understand that the private sector has also made a payment of an undisclosed amount of vaccines. We still yet to know how many vaccines have been paid by the private sector to assist the government.
Yeah, the issue of which vaccines to use is quite a topical and contentious one. Sello, I see that in Botswana, a Covishield from India, as well as part of the COVAX program, is what has been used. But this has had some adverse effects. Tell us about this.
When we talked to government officials when they did the update yesterday, they were not forthcoming in terms of exact details on the adverse effects that have occurred in terms of the vaccinations which have been done up to date. What they did say is that they are going to be studying any long-term adverse effects, because I think one of the questions was when these vaccines are taken, if they're going to have adverse effects, will the government provide medical insurance for those people who are affected? And the sentiment that we are getting from government is that that is not likely. And the argument that they used was that because Botswana has a public health system which provides free services, it seems like government will not provide a guarantee, that they'll provide insurance if there are adverse effects from taking these vaccines. And this is quite a contentious issue, as you know, because many of these vaccines that have been brought into many of these African countries, including Botswana, they have not been independently tested by our institutions. In Botswana, for example, typically what happens is that when you provide medicines in Botswana, you have to go through the Botswana Medical Regulatory Authority. In this case, because of these vaccines are considered for emergency use, they bypass that process. So a lot of the statistics we have on the efficacy of these drugs are provided by the manufacturers, and that is contentious because those figures are not impartial.
And that, as you know, Silo, in itself is a bone of contention, seeing that the manufacturers, at least Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer, both have said that they will not be held liable for any sort of adverse effects that arise from the usage of their vaccine, but instead have turned to governments, for governments to put together, these guarantees that you were speaking about. And still staying with you, Silo, the Botswana Medical Regulatory Authority, BOMRA, which is what you mentioned before, have said that they're investigating the case of 2 people who have died after taking the Covishield vaccine. Is that something that you're not quite aware of?
Well, officials, when we talk, we had a briefing yesterday with the COVID task force, which is the one that is basically overrunning the government response to the COVID-19 in Botswana. And they were reluctant to give us any figures in terms of adverse effects. So it would be very difficult for me to provide any sort of confirmation of the sort that you'd seek. Because, in Botswana, we are using quite a number of vaccines that apparently are going to be tested. The government has made part payment for Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, Sputnik, Covishield, Sinovac, and Covaxin. Pfizer, the amounts of vaccines that are going to be bought from Pfizer haven't yet been confirmed, but we can't rule out that the Botswana government at some point might want to explore taking those up. But in terms of the adverse effects, these are some of the issues that we are going to have to be following on the ground as the media, because as you know, with governments, especially most governments in the region, they are unlikely to voluntarily provide that information to you.
And Xolisani, how has the reception of the vaccines been on the ground? Some cases you find, especially in South Africa, you find that there has been a bit of reluctance from some quarters to take the vaccine. How is the attitude on the ground from citizens in Zimbabwe?
Well, Thami, at first there was kind of rollout the second phase, which involved the president being vaccinated and political leaders. That seems to have changed. We are yet to see when this vaccine is taken to rural areas, because this is where you find many people with myths and conspiracy theories running around or running away without anyone trying to explain to them how they'll react to the vaccine. But in urban areas, as well as the health workers who were in the first phase, yes, at first they were kind of like hesitant to take the vaccine. They raised issues to do with efficacy, as well as the issues to do with the who will cover us in an event of an after effect after taking the vaccine. Because at the moment, the government has got no fund to compensate anyone who falls ill to the vaccine or anything that happens that would happen after taking the vaccine. All those were issues which were being raised by the health workers. But at the moment, I can tell you that the government tried by all means to put in more effort to try and market the vaccine to people. So that led to an increase in the uptake. But we don't know how the people will take it, because these are the majority of Zimbabweans.
And in Botswana, Silo, how is receptivity to the vaccine from the general population?
Well, it would be very difficult to provide an objective assessment of the response to this vaccine. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on in social media, conspiracy theories, and so on and so forth. But we don't have a respected R&D institution which has provided up-to-date empirical data on what people are saying about their attitude to the vaccine. What we do know is that government has started providing vaccinations to people on the front line. I know the former vice president in a high-profile case was seen publicly taking the vaccine, and so too the former president. But one of the difficulties that we have, and I think this is an issue we raised yesterday with the COVID task force in Botswana, is that there's a difficulty in understanding the logic of the whole exercise. Because when you say to them, if you take this vaccine, are you likely to fall sick? They cannot provide a guarantee that that is not going to happen. If you take this vaccine, are you saying that people are not going to die as a result of COVID-19? There are no guarantees forthcoming from government. So those kind of issues, that ambivalence in the response to those type of questions, really raise a lot of questions about the efficacy of this COVID-19 vaccine. Because one of the issues that we also raised, as a media particularly, is, in Botswana we've got the Botswana Vaccine Institute. We've got institutions like the we've got a medical institution at the University of Botswana which has just been launched. And we've got the National Health Laboratory. And there's some difficulty in understanding, why do African governments not develop their own vaccine? Why must we depend exclusively on foreign vaccines, even when we are not sure about the efficacy? And I think what we are really dealing with is, I don't know whether it would be called mental bankruptcy, but there's a problem with our leaders not being receptive to the idea that Africans can provide solutions to issues which confront African populations. There seems to be this colonial era belief that everything that comes from outside is superior to anything that can be made internally. So there are no efforts to capacitate local institutions to make sure that we can try and come up with
Silo, you really have hit the nail on the head, because this is very much a subject and a topic that is being discussed as we speak this moment at the summit that's being held by African leaders, that the continent needs to be able to develop its own capacity, to develop its own vaccines, and COVID-19 hopefully will be taken as a lesson that we are better prepared next time, especially as you've mentioned, there's no guarantee that you will not get sick, and there's no guarantee that you will be well. So either way, it's a no-win type of situation if you look at it from that perspective. But gentlemen, I thank you very much both for your time today as you update us on the vaccination programs that are underway in Zimbabwe as well as Botswana. That was Xolisani Newzroom, who is our Newzroom Africa correspondent for us in Zimbabwe, as well as Selo Mosetla. He is the editor of the Tswana Times online publication.